There's something to be said about the final game in a trilogy or anthology. For some series, the last game really shines as the culmination of all of the lessons and lore which the previous entries brought to the table. For others, the final game might just kind of exist as a good to okay finisher to the story that's being wrapped up. But every here and there, the final game in a trilogy does not live up to its predecessors. And Fable 3 usually gets marked by fans of the series everywhere as a downright horrendous conclusion to Lionhead's trilogy, which has always been kind of weird to me because I genuinely enjoyed Fable 3 when it came out. I remember it bringing some new ideas to the table while refining a lot of the clunkiness of Fable 2. But that honestly could have been due to a lack of standards and expectations on my end 12 years ago. So in this video, I'm going to delve into the story, mechanics, and world building which the finale of this trilogy brought to the table. I'll be playing through the game and pointing out what I think was done well and what could have been done better. Before I begin, I'll note that I have a sponsor with Naraka Bladepoint that will appear about halfway through the video or so try not to be too alarmed. Alright, let's begin. Fable 3 kicks off with probably my favorite introduction of the series. The formerly medieval landscape has been transformed into an era of industry under the guidance of Fable 2's hero of Bower Lake. While many could view this as a good thing for the advancement of civilization and the like, the game is very adamant about showcasing the not-so-good aspects. Children laboring in factories, smog polluting the air, riflemen patrolling the streets. All of it really paints the difference between the utopia for the rich and the prison for the poor. The quote-unquote protagonist of this intro sequence is a chicken which gets chased, battered, kicked around, beaten, and overall just absolutely wrecked as it tries to fight for its freedom. The symbolism is pretty heavy-handed, as Teresa returns to narrate the idea that a rebellion is brewing against the elite of the kingdom. Counter to Fable 2's introduction, the protagonist of this game starts as the second son to the king. Also, he's partially voiced, which is definitely a completely different leap from the previous entries. I know that a lot of people aren't going to share this opinion, but I think with the way that Fable has historically done cutscenes, I would rather my character have a voice. In the first game, any emotional moment was usually dampened a bit by your character making goofy noises and faces. In the second game, the devs wanted to move away from that, but they decided to just make your guy never really react to anything at all, which was also not so great. So having my guy able to speak is probably the best way to go about things, even if it does take away a bit of the blank slate for you to insert yourself into. This is especially true as he only speaks every here and there when it's appropriate, but is otherwise silent. So after getting dressed in your choice of garb, you can head out to the castle grounds to mingle with the groundskeepers, soldiers, noblemen, and women. This is about as goofy as it's always been, though something about seeing a noblewoman dressed to the nines performing an over-the-top handshake with you is particularly funny to me. Now it is worth noting that at this point in time, the hero from the last game has passed on, and your older brother is the one leading the kingdom. In recent times, your brother has seemingly become more harsh, more unfair to his subjects, and overall more unpleasant. So it's up to you to either do your best to uplift and encourage the people around the kingdom, or to follow in his footsteps with crude behavior, harsh speeches, and the like. I enjoyed this new spin on the morality system, because whereas before you were just a random peasant who was working his way up to glory or a fledgling hero who could decide to be a complete asshole or saint, your words now have a weight to them that they didn't have before. Sure, you're essentially still terrorizing or reinforcing the people around you, but to me it means more when I'm playing the role of the prince of the land. And this role becomes perfectly clear when the climax of the introduction rears its head. Protesters break into the castle grounds, demanding that the king be hanged for allowing poverty and poor working conditions to run rampant. Your brother Logan orders his men to execute them all, starting with the ringleaders. When your guy goes in to stop the execution, Logan feels betrayed and instead offers the choice to be meted out by the prince instead. If you choose to spare the ringleaders, Logan will kill your childhood sweetheart. And if you choose to spare her instead, the ringleaders will be executed. This is an excellent introduction to this game, and it brings more consequence to your actions in a matter of 20 minutes of gameplay than a lot of Fable 2's choices. While you may not care too much about a character that you just met, the relationship displayed between the two, in addition to Elise's insistence that she should be the one to die, is a great way to instantly invoke a reaction from the player. I chose it before, but I still can't help but to choose to execute the ringleaders instead of Elise here again. The road to becoming a hero isn't forced onto Fable 3's prince in quite the same way as it was in previous entries. Instead, the prince decides to leave the castle of his own accord, along with his butler and mentor by way of a secret passage beneath the castle grounds. It's here that the first goal of the game is now made plain. First and foremost, you're to gather allies either through persuasion and good deeds or through force and corrupt actions. Second is to gather guild seals and use them to progress through the so-called road to rule. This is more or less the replacement for the experience and renown which the previous games utilized to allow you to advance your character's skills and attributes. And finally, the end goal for now is to use all of these gathered resources to overthrow your brother and to lead the kingdom in his stead. This is a really great way of immediately spelling out what needs to be done in this game, and Fable has always been pretty good about this stuff in general. A brief introduction, a tragedy, and a goal. And Fable 3 is no different when it comes to this simple but effective presentation. Alright, so there's a lot to unpack before moving forward with the story itself. So let's start with what's front and center. Fable 3's combat is basically Fable 2 with some tweaking. This is not my favorite thing, as a lot of the fights wind up looking like the same thing repeatedly. I wasn't completely bored with it, but I really do miss mixing in the assassin rush from the first game into my melee tactics, and would have loved to see more inventive stuff like that returning to this entry. But for the most part, melee is still about hitting stuff and combat rolling. It's not great in this game because nearly any human enemy can just block all damage at any given moment, even if they're barehanded, which is fucking stupid. Ranged is still about picking off enemies before they can get to you. I found it to be the most effective way of dealing with foes the vast majority of the time. Both ranged and melee come with a stylish set of kill animations, some of which are actually pretty cool looking. They don't fix the issues with the combat itself, but they do at least occasionally make you feel like a badass. And finally, magic is still about breaking the game by slinging spells. Magic in particular would easily be the saddest part of the system from a sheer innovation perspective, if it weren't for one thing that I'll mention in a moment. Your standard offensive spells still do damage, with your shock stunning enemies, your fireball just being another gun, your ice storm creating an AoE which doesn't hit very often, and your blades conjuring blades to blade people with. Meanwhile, the vortex and force push are more about controlling the field a bit and do less damage. When you charge your spells, all of them tend to create an AoE of magic with different flavors, which is pretty par for the course, but you do get access to all 5 charge levels immediately. Also, switching between your spells means going back to your map room and manually heading to the armament section, which is really damn stupid. I'll talk more about the menuing stuff in a moment. The big thing that somewhat saves this system is the fact that you can weave different spells together after obtaining the upgrade to do so. So if I were to combine the blade spell with the fireball gauntlet, I would get flaming swords. Or I would get an icy vortex if I combined ice storm and vortex. That's actually pretty damn cool. And while I did have fun messing around with these combinations, the big issue that I had was that nearly all of these spells were just different flavors of damage. Yeah, sure, vortex and force push were a bit more defensive, but combining them with other spells didn't really do too much for me beyond slightly being entertained by the cosmetic differences. Speaking of, a lot of these combos don't even bother coming up with a unique look. Ice Storm and Fireball / Shock / Force Push just perform the spells on top of each other, instead of combining into a Fire and Ice Storm or an Icy Thunderstorm or a Wall of Frost-infused force. And that kinda sucks because there were definitely some cool combinations which could have occurred here. Maybe the Fire and Ice Storm rains a puddle of water which then freezes the enemy's feet and locks them in place for a moment. Maybe Shock and Ice would weaken a foe's attacks. Maybe Force Push and Ice would freeze an enemy solid. There's just hardly any creativity here in a game that has so much potential for it. There are potions which you can activate in battle to summon familiars and slow time, which take the place of their spell counterparts in the previous entries, but I just hate that the first game literally brought the most to the table in terms of magic innovation. A shield, several buffs, multi-hits, a charge, good and evil centric spells, a charm spell, life drain. All of this shit was in the first game and just never made it back into the franchise after that. And that's a damn shame. Also, there's no health bar. Let me repeat that, there's no fucking health bar. The only time that I popped potions was when my screen edges started to get red, and that potion, I think, brought me back to full health. I mean, there's only one size of health potion in this game, so I imagine that it did. You wanna know what spurred on this absolutely senseless decision? My guess would be games like Call of Duty or Gears of War. You know, where your guy just regenerates over time and the screen gets gray if you take a lot of damage. Yeah, same exact system. Why the fuck would you ever think that this is a good system for anything other than a shooter? Your guess is as good as mine. The 2 other potions in the game also have no varying sizes. They don't have bigger or smaller forms which summon larger or smaller familiars, or slow time lesser or further, or heal you more or less. There is food, but you can't access it from a menu. This makes body morphing a lot harder to pull off, which has always been one of the better facets of the franchise. You can go to a vendor, buy a food item, hold the X button to eat it, and then repeat that process, which is really annoying. But what's really funny is that you can only ever carry one type of food item, even if they fundamentally do the same thing. So if I buy 5 stalks of celery and then I try to buy apples, the game will tell me that buying apples will replace my celery. How the fuck do you manage to build a game that functions like this? The last thing to note about combat is your weapons. Melee and ranged weapons fall into 2 categories apiece: swords, hammers, pistols, and rifles. Throughout the game, you'll find over 60 weapons with the DLC, all with different base damage and unlockable attributes. This is a very cool system, as each weapon requires you to perform various tasks ranging from making yourself fatter, to spending gold, to having kids, to increasing or decreasing your morality, to killing a certain type of enemy, and so on and so on. Each time you fulfill one of these tasks, you gain a new attribute on your weapon. Sometimes it's just raw physical or magical damage, other times it's the ability to earn guild seals in combat faster, to gain money on hit, to increase your attractiveness, to lose weight on each hit, and again, so on and so on. Additionally, as you use the weapon, it transforms and adapts to your morality, to the spells that you use, and to the enemy types that you kill. Peter Molyneux went on record stating that there were 100,000 weapon morphs in the game, and while I can't vouch for his honesty, I can say that there are a lot of morphs, which is a really cool point of replayability. Though that said, most of my weapons wound up looking nearly identical at the end of the game. And finally, using any style of combat grants a difference in physical appearance after you gain enough experience with them. Melee weapons increase your musculature, ranged weapons increase your height, and magic grants runes which appear on your body and clothing. It is classic Fable stuff, but I've always and still do appreciate it a lot. Next we have the experience system, which as mentioned before has moved over to the Road to Rule setup. This basically has you making your way through gates which require you to proceed through parts of the story to bypass, and then spending your seals on the chests within. Mechanically, Fable 3's experience system basically consolidates the previous game's split experience pools into one pool, which I'm overall mixed on. On one hand, it's nice to play my way without worrying about using a certain type of combat style, but on the other hand, those experience orbs are kind of a cool way to improve a stat, as it harkened back to a more traditional RPG type of grind. I'm not sold on the presentation of the experience system here either, though I will say that having upgrades locked behind story events is definitely a decent way to balance your game. The actual things that you can unlock are the usual power upgrades, but also stuff like being able to purchase property, gaining expressions, clothing dyes, marriage, and so on. The bigger difference is how you earn the seals needed for these upgrades. Sure, you can still kill shit for fat gains, but you don't receive them for eating particular foods or chugging 50 potions. Instead, you gain seals for completing quests, opening certain chests, and interacting with NPCs. That last one is particularly interesting, as every NPC has a specified amount of seals that they can grant you upon earning their respect and friendship, which places a far greater importance on those interactions. Now that sounds great in theory, right? You're working on becoming a respectable king who can lead his people in a more bountiful direction, so interacting with your future subjects should take a priority. But here's the problem in practice.
Did you bring anything?
Oh, you can always.
That's the stuff. It's all low.
Hello. Not to survive.
Slap, slap, punch. Yes.
Yeah, this is the unfortunate reality of the system that's been implemented here. The guild seal gain is insane for the early game, so you'd be losing out on a lot by not approaching every single one of these samey looking peasants and slapping their hands around like a car salesman. The trade-off here is that while this small gesture makes you more approachable, the time sink involved in tracking down every human and getting on their good side becomes a lot more annoying very quickly. And this actually gets a lot worse after you unlock the ability to increase friendships to the next level. Your expressions take a lot longer to pull off, and they lead to the person that you're talking to asking you to get them something or to drop off something in another area of the game. Now here's what I'm thinking. What if Fable 3 had some kind of wheel of emotion? You know, like a button that you could press to access all of your emotes, right? And like, when you perform these emotions, they affect everyone who's around you. Gosh, that would just be so cool. But I think the technology just wasn't there in 2010. There is a funny byproduct of this system which occurs if you try to befriend everyone immediately, which is that they'll all ask you to go to the only other village that you've unlocked besides Brightwall. You would think that there would have been a way to eventually mass influence people, but that would have been too easy, huh? At least you can always get people to hate you instead, which causes them to occasionally gift you items as bribes to get the fuck away from them.
It's a nightmare, isn't it?
Are you gonna take the thing or not?
Actually going through with the friendship quest has you literally running fetch quests back and forth between people, and it's the most dull thing that I could think of to do with my time, and I play RuneScape. It's non-stop tedium, and I dropped doing it altogether besides for people that I wanted to marry after the first batch of villagers. Sure, they'll give you discounts and gifts after, but it's just not worth my time, honestly. You would think that it wouldn't have taken much to have quests where you have to play the lute well, or dress a certain way, or kill an ex-husband in the dead of night while the kids are sleeping in the room next to him. There are so many tasks that could have been implemented here without creating new swaths of content. And the friendship system turning into all fetch quests just seems really lazy. It doesn't help that when I returned to my first wife with her mandatory package from another location, she opened her door to ask me to step in, I gave her the package, she asked if we could go on a date, and then she yelled for the guard because I was trespassing in her home. So I had to pay a fine on the way to our first date. I feel like I'm playing an early access game. The marriage system is at least decent. You go on a date, get them a ring, and ta-da! Marriage. Well, you can also choose how much money you want to spend on the wedding ceremony, which nets different scenes that change with the location. I did enjoy that facet to this entire system, and appreciated its addition quite a lot. Earning gold quickly has the job system returning from Fable 2, which I've always enjoyed to an extent and disliked to a different extent. Unfortunately, the variety here has been cut down from 7 available jobs in the previous game to 3. All of these tasks involve you pressing buttons in a timed rhythm game, and are way easier than Fable 2's jobs. That is a good thing because it's easier to rack up money for property purchases, but it's also a bad thing because there's no innovation here at all. Additionally, in order to rank up your jobs, you have to buy the ranks in the Road to Rule, meaning that there's not a huge point in doing them before you get a couple of ranks under your belt. It's kind of a stupid decision, and Fable 2's job system outshines 3's in every way. Of course, you can also steal from shops if you so choose, at least after grabbing the upgrade to do so. This has always been a shoddy system in these games, and it still functions more or less the same way in Fable 3. Basically, if people witness you stealing, your reputation with them decreases, and a timer appears on screen. If you're caught by a guard while the timer is ticking, you have to pay a fine. If you're not caught and the timer runs out, then all is forgiven. It's an okay idea, but with no way of stealthing or a meter to detect whether or not somebody can see you, I really don't have much fun doing it. Especially when I hide in a corner with no one around and I still get a timer when I steal, only to have to wait it out for a few minutes with no other punishment. I will say though that trade items make a comeback from the first game, which I'm much more inclined to steal when I see them. Basically, if you pick up a crate of tea or a sack of grain or whatever, you can then wait for a time or travel to a location where there's a shortage of the item and sell it for profit. It was a cool idea in the first game and I'm glad that they brought it back here. But none of that really matters in terms of profit when property management is in the game, and it very much is. Most of this system is the exact same as it was in the second game, but with some minor tweaks. So you can still snatch up property, move in, rent out, evict tenants, adjust prices, and all that jazz. But you also have to repair and maintain your property in order for it to continue to be worth its max value. If the state of repair on a home drops too low, your renters will refuse to pay anymore, which adds a bit of realism at the cost of, well, money. It's annoying, but it does make sense, so I'm not too bothered by it. The bigger addition here though is that you can now buy property directly from the map, which is a much better way of mass purchasing and not missing out on various homes and storefronts. Exploration doesn't really stray too far from the usual formula in these games, though it does have a bit more to it than Fable 2. You have a dog that sniffs out dig spots, enemies, and treasures. you can find silver keys in chests. You've got demon doors which want particular things from you in order to open. Gnomes now replace the gargoyle heads, but they still function the same with rewards ranging from cosmetic stuff to a rare gem to a dog training book to a special weapon depending on how much you destroy. It's all pretty standard stuff for Fable. But as far as new additions go, there are also 4 gold keys which can open particular doors across Albion. You also need to explore if you want to dye your tattoos, which has you gathering flowers located around the desert. And finally, there are also 30 rare books which lead to an achievement, but not much else to my knowledge. It's a veritable collectathon which is pretty hit and miss, but still somewhat fun to a degree in terms of adding content to the game. Now unfortunately, the quest tracking trail I think somehow got worse between these games. I don't remember this issue happening nearly as often in Fable 2, but my trail will non-stop get confused. It'll point me back the way I came. It will forget where it was going for a moment. It'll try to send me up a sheer cliffside. It'll point me at someone completely different than where I set it to. This also extends to the fast travel system in general. Basically, you can access a quest list in your map, and then you can set a quest to active and let it take you to the closest fast travel point. But it's not consistent in the slightest. The game will plop you partway through a town during one quest, and then have you start on the outskirts in another, even though the objective for the second one is right next to the first one. The game will tell you, hey, do you want to be as close as possible to the quest point? And you say yeah, and it puts you somewhere different. And then you go into the map and manually pick the quest to fast travel to, and then it'll put you next to it. It's really awful, and I don't know how they messed this up so hard. The map itself is also pretty bad, as it has you using a magnifying glass to zoom in and slowly scroll at a fixed angle. Rotating the map doesn't have it so that you pivot around the magnifying glass, rendering it a lot less useful. And the whole thing moves very slowly, which is aggravating when combing the map for random NPCs. Demon doors are always a treat, though there is one in particular that got destroyed by poor decision making. That would be the one where you have to invite an online friend to play with you. In the console versions of the game, there is a split screen option, but that isn't the case for PC. And with games for Windows Live being dead in the water, there's literally no way to open this demon door besides a lengthy workaround involving the tweaking of your files. And I also don't have friends who own or want to play Fable 3. So yeah, great insight with that one. Regardless, the ones that I could access tended to be pretty and interesting as they've always been. There's one where I have to show off my children in order to gain access to a skeleton party at a pub in the midst of a beautiful sunset. There's one where I have to go full sweaty gamer and max my weight and unattractiveness in order to gain access to a cave. It's just a cave. 40 guild seals though. There's another one where I need to be completely good or evil to access a nice little bay area. And finally, the last two are tied for my favorite setting in this game. The first one has you simply showing up as the king, which leads to the Pools of Sorrow. It's this pool, and there's a statue crying into it. But look at this place. That's fucking pretty. And the last one involves maxing out either your sword or gun skill and getting a legendary weapon's optional powers activated. This leads us to Planet 1, which is this gray, crater-laden moon-like landscape that's just so different from what I'd expect to see. Overall, the tasks which the doors present to you are pretty underwhelming, but there are some pretty damn cool landscapes which are unveiled by heading through them. The gold keys are underwhelming. It's weird because when you see these ornate doors protecting some secret or another, it makes you think that the treasures inside are going to be amazing. But the first one that I busted open gave me a fucking highwayman suit. Awesome. What's funny is that this is the only one that gives something like this, as the others give you random legendary weapons and 40 guild seals. So yeah, I don't know what the highwayman suit was doing here, but you would think that they would have given you a set of clothing that could only be obtained through the gold door, and not something that you could literally purchase at a shop. The weapons are a better treasure for sure, but I do again wish that they were exclusive, or that one of them was some new magic, or a hidden property, or a way to decorate your sanctuary map room area, or literally anything that made you go, oh shit, that's a really cool reward, I'm glad that I did that. I also wish that the doors themselves opened to something more interesting. I mean, they don't have to be discount demon doors, but they could have at least been a little more ornate on the opposite end. Clothing dyes are a great idea as always, and Fable 3 even allows you to use sliders to pick which shade of the color that you want. They're a bit finicky, but I do appreciate the addition to the game. Menuing is weird, as in there aren't any menus really. I think that the devs were trying something different here with the way that they structured everything, and while I didn't think much of it when it came to the road to rule, it became much more of a pattern when I realized that there isn't a pause menu after you snag the first guild seal. Instead, you have to teleport back to your map room that your butler is hanging out in order to access information about your outfits, weapons, attractiveness, attributes, and so on. You don't have an inventory, at least one that's not very accessible. Even the game options have to be walked up to in order to access unless you pause during dialogue. I can't remember how I felt at the time just due to being used to longer load times on the Xbox 360, but I imagine that there was probably quite a bit of load to get into these various places. Fortunately, the PC version is pretty devoid of lag, and jumping in and out of the map room is seamless. But it's still a really awkward way overall of presenting your interactive pause menu. If you hadn't noticed the pattern yet, Fable 3 is just loaded with good ideas on a surface level, and then immediately beaten down when the execution falls flat at nearly every turn. It's like, oh, good idea. Wait, why did they implement it that way? And boy does it grate on you after a couple of hours. This sort of thing extends to pretty much anything in this game. You can't check on your potion count or refresh your memory easily about what a particular item does. You have to walk up to rows of pedestals in a pawnbroker shop to sell your stuff. Same goes for buying. And the worst part is that nearly every single action has you holding the A or X button to perform. Entering doors, accepting quests, starting jobs, etc. Which is an absolute dogshit way to make sure that the player doesn't mispress a button. The entire thing is just a really awkward system that isn't the worst thing in the world as much as it makes me scratch my head and wonder why. Alright, before I continue on with the story, let's move over to my sponsor for this video, Naraka Bladepoint. So Naraka is a 60-player high-speed battle royale between fantasy-inspired warriors, ninjas, archers, and gunmen. I know the term battle royale tends to set off some flags and eye rolls among a lot of people because I'm one of them. But I've never been opposed to the idea of them if they're done right. For me, Naraka is one of those games that takes the genre and does something special with it. The combination of flashy melee techniques mixed with tactical sniping and fast-paced movement is a super fun take on the ideas that a BR can encompass. Honestly, the grappling hook alone is always a fantastic addition to a multiplayer game in my opinion, even if I use it more to stick myself to enemies rather than for traversing the map. Speaking of maps, a new one is actually dropping today featuring a new weather system, various traps, and biomes. These guys are constantly adding new melee and ranged weaponry, new characters, and new maps to the game, which is a proactive approach that I found lacking in a lot of other BRs. Much of the stylized movement and combat looks right at home with a single-player action game, which works out with the recently added PvE mode and introduction onto the latest Xbox consoles. It's really fun to see the shift in playstyle and the variance in approach which comes with different characters, weapons, and settings inserted into a genre that's historically been quote-unquote solved. So if any of this sounds like something that you'd be into, please feel free to check out my link in the description of the video and pick up Naraka Bladepoint on PC or Xbox. There's actually a free weekend going on right now along with a half-off discount, so you can try it out if you want to. Plus the game's also on Game Pass if that strikes your fancy. Thanks guys. Alright, let's jump back into the story. So as stated before, your goal is to make allies on your way to overthrowing your crazy-ass brother. This involves a string of missions where you right the wrongs which your brother has inflicted unto the citizens of Albion. Along the way, you get a glimpse at the madness of the king as he cartoonishly insists that he would burn the kingdom to the ground before giving it up. There is no reasoning behind this. He's just a mad king that needs to be stopped. Trust me, I know there's going to be some big reveal later, but this particular scene doesn't make sense with the big reveal later. After clearing out a bandit camp and deciding whether or not to execute or spare the leader, you now have to complete some mandatory side quests. Of course, you can choose which ones that you partake in, or just not do them at all if you want to go around and hug villagers and stuff. Or I guess you could do them all if you felt like punishing yourself. Yeah, they're not great. One has you rescuing a child from a mine, which is a literal escort mission with no redeeming factors. One has you dressing up in a chicken suit to escort chickens around because haha, chicken suit funny. One has you delving into a cursed book of plays and performing because haha, cross-dressing funny. And the last one has you activating the guard gnomes for you to hunt down later. When all is said and done, you recruit your first peasant village to fight for you by brokering a deal to ship food and drink from one town to the other. It's a cool way of progressing, but a lot of the charm is lost when I had to deal with quite a bit of bullshit to get to this stage. Unfortunately, this is pretty much how a large swath of this game is conducted. You head through a cave and you fight some hobs, then Teresa pops in and goes, "Wow, holy shit, you are a real hero. Please, learn how to purchase real estate." Then you head through the zombie woods where the zombies are zombieing around. You play through a mortar section which takes too long, some combat which takes too long, and a boss fight which takes less time than the regular combat that you just fought through. None of it is very fun. It's just kind of there. But something really tells me that the devs thought that their combat system was great. Like, it happens for so long with nearly any given planned fight that I can't help but think that they were sure that they knocked it out of the park. Eventually you drudge through the muck of the swamp into the muck of the industrialized Bowerstone. This is something that Fable 3 brings to the table that's definitely a lot more unique, and the setting is a very welcome one. Running the show in this smoggy hellscape is none other than Reaver from the previous game. With him being immortal as long as he saps the life force of innocence, it's no wonder that he's now made it to the position that he's in. The former hero of skill is still a complete bastard, and he demands that his workers toil away without taking breaks or mouthing off.
We have to stand up to Reaver!
But lying down is so much easier than standing up.
The rebellion, which has been in the works, is headed by a group in the sewers in the industrial sector of Bowerstone. In order to recruit them, you gotta do some more mandatory side questing to gain favor. Ironically, a few of these quests take place in the flourishing upper part of Bowerstone where the markets are. This area is built on the backs of the borderline slave labor in the pits below, and you would think that a good chunk of the population here would be against you reforming the balance of power. But Fable 3 is only skin deep. So of course it's only going to be a, "Wow, the hero is here, let's give poor people some of our wealth," sort of ordeal. The side questing here actually isn't horrible, which is surprising but welcome. One of them has you role-playing as the hero in a tabletop game, which has some pretty meta jokes about questing and enemy variety, which is ironic given how much this game struggles with those very things. It's like the devs knew, but they didn't want to outright say it.
Quick, let's make something up. How about a standard Hollow Man encounter?
Yeah, let's have some bloody action!
I also like the treasure in here, which was a legendary condom. The next quest actually involves Elise, who we left back at the castle. She's since moved on and found herself another man who's running a house for the poor, and she's been helping to make a difference around Bowerstone. After some thugs kidnapped Elise, her new man asks you to help rescue her, which has us taking the thugs out and diving into the sewers. After she explains what happened with her, she claims that she did her best to move forward with her life, settling down with a man that she knew to have a great heart. At the end of the quest, you can convince her to either go back to her man and live her life, or to come back to you. It's actually a pretty damn good quest, at least by the precedent set by Fable 3 so far. I wound up convincing Elise to dump her new fiancé, which takes a few days before she's ready to move back with you. I'll stick her in an isolated mountain home so she doesn't see the wife collection that I've got going across Albion. The last side quest that I took on before gaining enough favor has us stumbling upon a man who's unhappy in his marriage. Basically, his wife has been super unfair to him and has been flirting with men around the town. He wants out of this marriage, but he wants it to be his wife's idea. So I gotta go in and pseudo-cuck the guy. This is back-to-back marriage-breaking missions here. So after seducing the guy's wife, she serves him divorce papers, and he excitedly thanks her. Well, now she's mad that he's happy about it, and she orders me to kill her husband so that she can gain a wealthy inheritance. Now there are a couple of options here. Obviously we can kill him, or we can walk away. But we can also kill her, which is an evil action that nets me bad boy points. Or we can kill them both, which the game claims to be a fair decision, so there's no loss or gain in morality. Can't argue with that one. All in all, it's a pretty solid string of side quests, which is pleasantly surprising and has tipped the scales of the quest design back towards the neutral mark, I would say. Well, hold on to that thought, because the next main quest has us infiltrating Reaver's mansion during a party. How do you think this one's gonna go? Little espionage? Maybe some sneaking around while pretending to be lovers with the resistance leader to ensure that we blend in? Oh, how about knocking out a chef to take his outfit and then using it to serve drinks directly to Reaver?
The wheel of misfortune.
Yeah, Lionhead has one trick, and by God are they committed to it. I just can't help but envision the quest design team as one guy who goes, "Alright, so they disguise themselves, infiltrate the party, and hob fight." So yeah, this whole quest is the arena of the game. You'll notice this kind of replication happening a lot, and I'll have much more to say about it later. Still, what a bold move to create an idea with 5 fucking enemy types in the game. Now that takes some balls. Wait.
Oh, now this is a very special round. Wait till you see what treasures I have in store for you next.
Holy shit, they did it! They made a brand new enemy type. Sure, there's no mini-bosses like trolls or queen banshees or anything like that from Fable 2. Sure, there are less unique bosses like the Kraken, the giant scorpion, or other heroes from Fable 1, but you know what? There are sand ladies, and they jump out of the ground and dodge melee attacks almost constantly. Now that's innovation, baby. So yeah, we fight 5 rounds, save the resistance member who's being held there, and then the resistance joins us. Hooray! The next scene has us attending an announcement by the king, who has captured one of the people that we recruited earlier. The king claims that he knows that there are more traitors who are plotting to overthrow him, and then states that he's going to execute this man. We just watch. You know, we weren't gonna blow our incredibly subtle cover or anything.
He has to be stopped, no matter what it takes. He has to be... Come on, we need to tell the others.
You know what, whatever. That guy wasn't important. But if he had been, we'd be in trouble right now. So the rebels figure that the best way to make sure that this doesn't happen is to continue recruiting less important people to be executed from the distant land of Aurora. We fight our way to a ship and hop on it. You notice all of those battleships in the background? Yeah, these guys didn't either. Hey, at least we're not in a prison tower this time. So we make our way through some sand-filled ruins with the company of our mentor who will literally not stop talking. It was like the writers were afraid of the player getting bored if Walter here paused for 5 seconds to allow any thought to cross the player's mind. He also insists that the hero go around to pull a bridge lever to get him across, and as you get to the lever he's like, "Hey, be careful, we don't want to make a bunch of noise." Dude, just hop down the 7-foot jump and walk around with me then. Well, eventually the true antagonist of this game makes itself known, which is this alien-looking Lovecraftian monster known as the Crawler, which summons and manipulates these other shadowy figures. The shadows die in one hit, so magic makes these fights look silly. But the shadows can also take control of these suits of armor around the area, which gives them a little more oomph. Actually, they kind of remind me a bit more of the Jack of Blades minions in the first game. Still, it is kind of cool to see, and you can tell that Lionhead spent a lot of time on them. I just don't know how we went from, "Hey, check out all of this industry," to, "Alright, here come the aliens." I mean, I guess the series has already tossed aside any of the good ideas revolving around heroes and their role in Albion, so you might as well introduce some alien evil instead of a man who wants to control a tower. But either way. The end result of this cavernous foray is the Crawler trying to manipulate and corrupt the hero, while claiming that Albion is doomed. He also takes control of Walter for a bit, temporarily blinding him so that Teresa has a new friend. Temporarily, of course. One of the cooler aspects to this whole ordeal is the fact that going back to the sanctuary to swap weapons or the like reveals that it's completely fallen into disarray with this shadowy goop staining it all over. It is a nice touch that helps the player get into the mindset of what's happening here, since the end goal is shifting away from taking out Logan to taking out the Crawler. When we make it out of the cave, we find ourselves in a random desert or the UK this summer if you squint hard enough. The game then tosses you a token decision just because the devs wanted to continue the facade of Fable 3 having a lot of depth with its choices. In this case, you can choose to help or abandon Walter. The decision to help him out lasts 10 seconds before he collapses and you go on without him anyways. To be fair here though, I'll bet it would have been absolutely brutal to cross the desert this slowly had he continued to stay upright. Also, you can see the amount of work that was put in to make this desert area different than you might expect. The Crawler continues to haunt the hero while trying to whittle him down, presenting imagery of Walter's suffering and the like. Eventually, the hero collapses and wakes up in the city of Aurora, where its people have taken care of him in his unconscious state. The city itself is a dilapidated ruin, ravaged by the Crawler. It's a good setting that's wholly welcome at this stage, though it doesn't last long. After getting to understand the trials that these people have underwent, the hero promises to protect Aurora once the revolution concludes. And that's all we're really doing here for now. It's kind of abrupt, but I'm guessing that things were kind of rushed at this stage. But there is one extra detail that comes before that. Logan was here too 5 years ago on an expedition. He also encountered the Crawler, and he promised the citizens here that he would protect them as well. This is going to come up later obviously, but it's something to keep in mind for now. This whole next stretch of gameplay only compounds the focus that Lionhead brought to the table with the big ideas of Fable 3, even if those ideas are scatterbrained. First off, we have the battle for Albion, which sees the city of Bowerstone being turned into a battlefield. I will say that the motivation of overthrowing Logan brings about enough immersion to actually have some fun with fighting through this war-torn city. This has always historically been the case with games that didn't have super amazing combat, as a good reason to fight usually makes me forget about how good or bad a fighting system is. When we finally make it to Logan, he just gives up without a fight, simply uttering that he had a reason for ruling the way that he did before being escorted away. And now with my absolute 5-head crowned, I can begin my reign as king and push into the second act of this game. This is where the most fun can be found in my opinion, as all of the promises that the player has made to their citizens comes full circle. The player now gets opportunities from here on out to weigh in on various decisions, acts of judgment, and so on. I can easily see this being a very boring part for a lot of players, but I guess I just like the idea of creating the laws and weighing in on decisions. If someone told me, yeah, I thought that the ruling part of the game was really goddamn boring, I would completely respect that. At the top of the docket is the trial of Logan, who pretty much everyone wants dead, obviously. Logan claims that he did everything that he did because Teresa popped by to show him what the Crawler and its darkness would do to the kingdom if they weren't prepared. So he raised an army and made Albion as strong as he could while sacrificing the less fortunate. This is the lamest cop-out, feel-good writing that could have stemmed from this part of the game. Why did the devs include the scene where Logan practically cackles over his map of the kingdom and asserts that he would rather see it completely destroyed before leaving his hands if he was just doing all of this because it was the best thing for Albion? Why wouldn't Logan simply ask his brother to parley and discuss what's actually going on now that the hero has the experience needed to lead under his belt? You know, avoid the destruction of Bowerstone and the lives of a fuckload of soldiers? I'm for the idea of Logan being the good guy and doing what he'd felt needed to be done to reinforce Albion, but I would rather the hero reject Logan's offer to meet, or to choose to not believe him during the parley, or there to be some kind of misunderstanding that caused Logan to react with hostility. And if you didn't want to go down that route, I'd honestly rather just have Logan be corrupted by the Crawler. I mean, I know that's not the most inspired way to write either, but I guess I like it better than, oh, well, I was actually a good guy the whole time. Especially after all of the heinous, horrible shit that he was doing and the whole, laughing over the map stuff. I don't know. It just turns into this kind of, oh, I was trying my best, brother, I'm sorry, which is just lame. And to clarify, Logan is being 100% truthful here and isn't trying to deceive the hero in order to spare his own life. This is further expanded on when Teresa sucks you back into the Shadow Realm to give you the full picture. With you now leading the people, you can keep your promises and be loved by all, but will have a lot harder time raising money in order to protect the citizens. Or you can take over where Logan left off, break your promises, and be despised in order to save as many as possible. Of course, as much as the whole game wants you to view this whole experience as a black and white choice, it really all just comes down to money. And with how people flip-flop at the drop of a hat depending on your actions, it's quite easy to tax the shit out of them, raise the money that you need, and then lower the taxes afterwards so that people love you again. Again, another great idea full of intrigue, but the execution, man, it's rough. Though to be fair, this facet of the game in particular is still fun to me regardless, so I'm not quite as upset as I am with a lot of the other complaints that I've had thus far. After getting walked through how to donate your riches to the kingdom, your next order of business is setting the tax policy. At this stage, I've made about half of the money that I need to get everything squared away. But again, making money in this game is really easy. I just gotta hike up the prices and wait. So while pushing the taxes to European levels would be helpful, sticking to US policies and pushing the country into tremendous debt is the play here. Additionally, I can choose whether to reinstate child labor, whether to rebuild the old quarter where all of the fighting took place, what to set the guard budget to decide on the castle's color scheme, and to figure out what to do with Aurora. I go the good boy route here, which has us building a school for children, rebuilding the old quarter on top of one of my wife's graves, giving the guards a raise, and rebuilding Aurora. Oh, also I painted the castle red, which was evil. If I wanted blue, I'd have to choose good. There aren't any blackened suits of evil armor or scary chandeliers or staff that dress with dark hues of red and black, just like the opposite decoration decision doesn't present you with opulent white and gold decor with beaming servants of good. I knew this one going in since I chose the good decor last time. The missed opportunities to choose how to reinvigorate your castle with specific details hardly surprised me at this point, and honestly I'd have rather it stayed Logan's color of purple. But whatever. I'm not going to cover every little decision that you make, but this first string is a pretty good example of what to expect as you go on. Of course, you'll occasionally get the option to go out and perform certain deeds for the kingdom, such as obtaining a rare diamond or the like. But these decisions to me are the backbone of Fable 3. It may not seem like much, but I really do enjoy deciding the fate of these people and ruling how I want to. The choices that you can make here usually tend to lead to new establishments being built and areas being transformed, which is a fun touch that I thought that Fable 2 lacked. The whole system makes the game a lot more replayable than you might think, even if again those decisions are very black and white. I do gotta say though that one of the policies that you set involves lifting the limit of alcohol which people can purchase or restricting it entirely. If you lift the ban, you can lose 100,000 gold. But if you enforce the ban, you can gain 100,000 gold from wealthy nobles. This makes no sense seeing as people spending their money on alcohol would be a boon to the kingdom's coffers, especially given that one of the decisions before this involves potentially gaining 1.25 million if you establish a whorehouse. The same logic should apply. People spending their cash on their vices equals money for the kingdom. But whatever, I guess it can't all make sense in the wacky world of Fable. After a few rounds of this sort of thing, the final battle is prepared for the player in the form of being asked whether or not they're ready to raise Albion's army. Before I jump into that, I think it's time to cover everything that I've missed, hopefully. Let's start with the areas that I haven't covered, which take a bit of navigation to get to. First up is the Sunset House, which is Chesty's appearance in this game. The house is destroyed in the daytime, but a ghostly illusion of it appears intact at night. After arranging the statues off to the side to match their daytime counterparts, the house appears fully intact in the daytime also. The setup to this is actually really creepy and fun to look at, but as always, yeah, execution. You get it. So you sleep in this bed, wake up in Chesty's dream world, and the objective is to play chess against him. Well, partway through the game, the devs, Chesty, goes, "Wow, this is boring. You know what would be fun? Fighting enemies." Yeah, why not? So you fight the enemies and that's it for this part of the house. The second part of the house has a mirror with a reflection of a floating skull instead of you. You guide the skull to the glowing bits in the reflection to unlock the second mirrored half, which contains some treasure. And that's really about it for this place. I will say that thematically, it's really cool. Sure, the mechanics and the puzzles were just alright, but I found the setting to be really enjoyable, and I wish that there was a lot more stuff like this in the rest of the game. Next up is Driftwood. Driftwood is where some hippies who Reaver pushed out with his industrious ways have set up and tried to build a new home. As the name implies, it's a waterlogged zone containing tree-filled islands. While it isn't anything super special thematically like the Sunset House was, it is kind of a cool map in its own right. The town gets a lot more interesting though as you help it grow via introducing a carpenter and a gambler to it. Bridges are built between the islands, and lights are strung up so that it glows at night. Again, it's not anything really super special, but I do like how it feels quite a lot. Now let's talk about all the side quests that I did. Well, okay, not all of them, seeing as I did literally every single one on the good side playthrough. But the bulk of these that I didn't mention previously aren't super great, as you might expect. Most of them felt pretty obligatory in nature, and didn't really do much to supplement the game with fun and inventive ideas. You've got escort and fetch quests, which involve fighting the same recycled enemies repeatedly. You've got a string of assassination quests, which are meant for evil playthroughs, I guess, but they really only showcased how laughable the punishment system is for breaking the law.
Any funny business and you'll never leave this place, I'll tell you that.
That sheriff will never make me talk.
I'm gonna put you in the ground.
Thank you, citizen.
You may go. Suppose I should confiscate your weapons. Bothered with all that paperwork. When I catch you, you're in for it.
What's funny is that it would be so easy to make these quests have a good outcome, where you can turn in the person who's trying to hire you to assassinate people. But no, these are just the bad quests. Earn evil morality and guild seals or ignore them. Many of these quests are relatively mundane in that they'll have you bring a book or a message or whatever to someone else. But these usually lead into other quests later, so I don't have as many gripes with those. But even when they do begin to open up into the meat of the quest string, the ingenuity is lacking as always. You've got this one where you collect wolf bones, which involves a curse that stemmed from a betrayal. It isn't anything to write home about from a writing angle though. Then there's one where you can kill an innocent guy so that you can prove that you're evil enough to access the evil location in this game. This leads into you occasionally popping by to help this guy out with his rebuilding of the shrine. Which is a good idea, right? But what you actually do is help him clear out hollow men. Then grab a lever which is at the end of a room filled with hollow men. It's just not a very fun line of questing, and you would think that the more interesting route here would have been to actually help decide where certain things would go and how they would function. A customizable torture chamber. Decorations that might be evil looking or completely ridiculous. Shit like that. But it's just the same old kind of missions over and over and over. And this dark temple doesn't lead to much else besides being able to barbecue people for evil points. Then there's a quest where the two guys who fucked around with the Book of the Dead in the last game want to fuck around with it again in this game, but this time they're dead. It's like any new ideas were already spent, so might as well bring back the exact same types of quests with the exact same types of characters. That's not bad writing, that's a callback, and I assure you that it's very clever. And finally, I would actually cover a bit of the DLC here, but I honest to God could not get this to work on PC. I spent about a day trying to mess with various folders, following different guides, tutorials, and so on, and I just couldn't get it. But it's at least worth mentioning that Fable 3 had a plethora of Day 1 DLC outfits, hairstyles, tattoos, and so on, in addition to a Day 1 content pack that contained 3 quests and an area beneath Bowerstone known as Understone. There were also some pre-order tattoos and a quest pack which occurred after the main game concludes. I unfortunately had assumed that I followed the steps to activate all of this correctly, but ultimately couldn't find it when I went hunting for the remainder of any interesting content that I had missed. The end of Fable 3 comes very abruptly, but I surprisingly enjoyed it a bit more than I thought I would. I'm not saying that it's good, I'm just saying that my expectations were below sea level at this point. Basically, after signing the paper that locks in how many of your civilians are going to die during the final battle, you immediately find yourself in a shadowy Bowerstone. Again, you can tell that these guys put a lot of effort into the effects for moments like these. And while it is still Fable combat, it's not the worst thing in the world. The final battle has us encountering the Crawler for the second and final time, who puts its entire body down Walter's throat. Walter gobbles it down like a champ, virtually no gagging, cementing himself as Albion's top bordello candidate. Jokes aside, the Crawler is definitely very creepy. And while I wouldn't put him anywhere near the Jack of Blades as far as villains go, this scene is actually pretty damn good by Fable 3 standards. Regardless, the final battle is against a possessed Walter, which surprised me during my first run. I thought for sure that this was a warm-up. But Fable 3 really hated the idea of creating big boss battles with large enemies. I don't know why, seeing as both Fable 1 and 2 had them. Still, there is a somewhat sad scene which follows, as Walter dies at the end of all of this. And then that's really it. Teresa stops by at Walter's memorial statue to commend you on your deeds and summarize how you accomplished everything. And what's weird is that this little summary makes me kind of want to run through this whole thing again sometime as an evil hero. So that's gotta count for something. The plot of this second chunk of the game was really strangely structured overall. I mean, yeah, if you take it at face value, it's a pretty straightforward plot. An ancient evil makes its move and you know it's going to take a year to get to Bowerstone, so you have to prepare for it. And then you fight it. But I mean, the whole thing feels like this was the most basic outline that the writers came up with. You would think that there would be supplementary details added which had you encountering the Crawler multiple times, or having to repel it in some way from various parts of Albion. But it's just like, okay, here it is, you'll see it again in a year. There is a post-game, but the effects of it are very subtle. That's not actually a bad thing, but if you're expecting grandiose quest lines, you might be a bit disappointed unless you have the DLC. One of them has you buying a key to access the chamber for the final gold key. Another has you financing a journey to discover another continent. But you wouldn't ever know what happened with that unless you visited Driftwood afterwards and found the shipwreck with the logs of the journey beside it. The third quest has you escorting an author who wants to study and document Hobbes in the hopes that he could understand them and eventually ingratiate them into human society. If you return later, you'll find his journal, which indicates that he was eaten by Hobbes. The fourth quest has you digging up a statue in the desert. And that's really it for that one, you can just see it in the temple later. And the last one has us delivering a brain in a jar to a hermit who knows how to talk to the dead. This one has him predicting that you'll do a DLC quest later, if you have it. But I don't, so yeah. Fable 3 is the perfect example of great ideas with poor execution. Nearly every mechanical facet of the game is just dragged through the mud by awful implementation in a way that's actually fucking astonishing. It's like watching Peter Molyneux walk up on stage, unveil an elaborate diamond necklace, and then dropping his pants to take a fat shit in it before shoving it into a box and demanding money for it. I know the guy's been long seen as a con man type who's overpromised and underdelivered, but I do think that he went out on stage to do what he did best, selling games. Yeah, it did catch up to him as it rightfully should have, but a lot of the guy's introspection in the aftermath rings true for me as something that I agree with. Most of Lionhead's issues with these games were their own fault. And while you can look at a lot of the smaller stuff that wasn't on them as being the reasons for the studio's downfall, the lion's share is and has always been on them. The direction that this game took thematically, mechanically, story-wise, design-wise, and so on is absolutely baffling. When I first started recording this game, my wife asked me if I was having fun, and I answered yeah, it was pretty fun. That opinion degraded in a matter of a single day. The game that Fable 3 is on the surface is much different than what it is underneath, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around how everything went the way that it did. The quest design of this game was implemented like the devs had a checklist, and honestly, they likely did. Oh, remember the arena? Wasn't that a fun time? Oh, remember those two with the Normonomicon? Yeah, that was really good. Remember the Temple of Scorn where you could bring innocents to be tortured and killed? Golly, that was great. You know something? These guys would be really good nowadays at creating the perfect nostalgia bait video game. And people would eat it up as long as they could do it without making stupid decisions that hinder gameplay. Like, this is an ongoing issue with remakes that prey upon nostalgia that goes beyond the gaming industry in general. In a way, Lionhead was ahead of the curve on that, and had they held it together for 8 more years, Fable 3 probably could have been a smash hit from 2018 onward. Again, barring all of the shittier parts that could have been fixed up pretty easily. The combat in this game is something that I can't understate as aggressively average. Swing your sword, shoot your gun, and sling your spells. Repeat this over and over with the tiniest breadcrumb of variance and you have Fable 3 combat. Spells have been watered down to their most base form, but have been reinforced a bit with mixing. Ranged and melee have kill animations to keep the player's monkey brain entertained. Your health bar is gone because that's distracting and reminds people that they may just be playing an RPG. And while this game does try to rely on the meshing of spells and the abundance of weapons with various attributes, it just doesn't fix the fundamentals that cause this game to stray from being an RPG. I swear to God there was a poll, a hidden survey, some kind of black market industry knowledge that said, hey, the most gamers play action games and they hate thinking about what they want their character to be. Because this trend of washing away the good parts of an RPG system to replace them with more action-oriented combat and themes was and is an industry-wide problem in AAA games. Items, enemy variety, and menuing in this game are all abysmal. Food and potions mean practically nothing compared to what they meant in the previous entries. Enemies stick to a literal handful of presets which cause you to want to run past them by the time you hit the midway point. This weird interactive menu that Lionhead decided to not scrap in the beta stages is a genuine hindrance for the enjoyment of this game. The subtitles turned off every time I exited the game for some reason. Dyes gave you a color gradient that would jump from bright to dark somewhere around the middle. They also wouldn't save if you didn't manually run over to these dummies off to the side. And I know that the last ones were some very minor complaints, but they really add up with all of the other incomprehensible decision making from the devs here. The biggest gripe that I have with this game though is the clashing themes of it. So the biggest difference that this game brings to the table thematically is that it's set in the Industrial Revolution era of Albion. Steamboats, rail cars, factories, all that kind of stuff. And yes, of course, stuff like the industrial part of the map exists, but that's just it. It exists. There really aren't many, if any, mechanics revolving specifically around these themes. They just kind of exist while you continue to fight off mercenaries, hollowmen, hobs, and balverines. Not robots, automatons, mechanically enhanced foes. No half werewolf, half machines. Nothing like that. You continue to use swords, shoot guns, and sling spells. It doesn't play any differently. There aren't mechanical puzzles which utilize this new technology. Hell, there are hardly any puzzles at all. And you just continue to flip these magical switches and collect keys for chests and all that stuff. You don't venture through a factory and interact with the machinery. You only take on jobs that are medieval in nature, such as blacksmithing, pie making, or being a bard. You have this really fun theme and you go, yeah, well, Reaver just uses it to be an asshole. And now there's an alien over here. Here he comes. It felt like there were two dev groups that wanted their idea to be the game's focus, and someone decided, well, why not both? And they both slaved away to insert their visions of the game, dividing it into a half where you are actively fighting towards overthrowing the king, and another half where you rule, but hey, sometime in the future there's gonna be black jizz all over the place and you gotta clean it up. If you stick to one, you could have had Logan defeat the revolution the first time, causing you to have to retreat to Aurora, to slowly import, scavenge for, and build up your own industrious war machines. To return with the force of mechanized horrors beyond the average person's comprehension, in an epic battle that results with you being the king and having the post-game to rule. Or you could have had it so that Logan parlays with you partway through the game, adds his forces to yours, and works with you to become a hero himself. The two of you could fight together, with the player being able to swap between Logan and the hero to actively work against the crawler. You could have had it so that the crawler began to take over small settlements before getting beaten back, only for it to return and absorb larger areas, transforming them and corrupting them. You pool your resources, send in armies of various sizes depending on your wealth, and eventually have to kill Logan when the crawler possesses him. Either of these would have been completely fine and different from the same types of story elements which Fable 1 and 2 shared. Because let's face it, when the game wasn't going its own direction, a lot of the story beats were the same. The evil temple, the duo with the Normonomicon, Chesty, the fake arena, the midway point where you can't return to Albion until you complete a chunk of the story. All of this stuff seemed like they threw it in there to form a loose connection with the previous entries. But the sparse beauty of Fable 3 is that it is different. That lack of difference was the biggest issue that I had with Fable 2. The one that made me go, well, if you're gonna retell a story, why didn't you bring back cool stuff like heroes? I don't think Fable 3 needed heroes and the like, but it did need something. A lot of something. So is Fable 3 as bad as everyone says it is? Well, yes, but also no. I know this sounds strange after all of this negativity, but I did still have some semblance of fun. The game isn't terrible, it's just not good. The choices that you could make as the king, the promises that you can break or fulfill, the way that you can change the face of Albion, all of that stuff is brilliant. Fable 2 lacked it when you became royalty. But is it worth all of these other bewildering decisions? The dumbing down of RPG elements? The weird choices mechanically and thematically? I'd say no, definitely not. It's not the Fable that people wanted, and they were right to be upset. And while the game isn't bad and that I still enjoyed a good chunk of my time with it towards the start and the end, that large swath in the middle is really hard to overlook. A lot of people were surprised by my reaction to Fable 2, and maybe that's just a me thing. But to me, Fable 1 brought so much life into gaming and filled a void that I didn't know was there. The characters, the story ideas, the body and outfit customization, the RPG elements, the humor, and so on were so fucking fun to witness unfold. And I didn't want a copy with some fun ideas tacked onto it. I wanted an expansion on the world of Albion. And that's what Fable 3 tried to create. They just stumbled and tripped and fell on their ass doing it. Fable 4 scares the shit out of me. I have no idea what's going on with it, but I'd be willing to bet that people would be happy with the same regurgitated ideas from 1 and 2. And I really don't know if that's what would make it the best that it could be. Thanks for watching. This was a weird one for me because I didn't want it to be so negative, but I just couldn't help it. Game needed another year in the oven, or 2. Either way, I'm unsure what I'll be cooking up next, but it'll be better than Fable 3. But until then, I've got merch on my merch shop, probably. There's a Demon Door coffee shirt raring to go if you're feeling coffee-ish. I've also got a Twitch where I stream nearly every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. I've got a Twitter where I tweet infrequently, I think. I've got a Discord where people shoot the shit in the meantime. And I've got a Patreon. And that's it. Have a good one.